What are the most overrated films of this past decade? I had so much fun making this list. I'm Jonathan Hetterly. This is a special episode of Psych Cinema. Now, I already did my favorite films of the past decade, but I had a lot of fun thinking about what do I think are the most overrated films of the decade. And I get it. Hating on things are lazy and easy, but so am I. So I really enjoyed coming up with this list. This is not worst films of the decade because if I can tell that a film is not going to be good, I'm not going to waste my time or money. Remember, I'm a full-time mental health counselor. I'm doing this on the side, so this is really more about films that I think are okay or good, but I don't understand the critical or commercial acclaim that it has received. And so without further ado, I want to share with you my 10 most overrated films of this decade. Number 10, Joker. Now, I did plenty of videos on Joker, both a review and a Psych Cinema that you can check out here. I like Joker. I think it is a perfectly fine film, but I think there is zero depth to it. I think the director, Todd Phillips, is mostly blamed because he's done films like Old School and Road Trip, and I think he's a pretty vacant person when it comes to creativity or nuance. So I don't understand why Joker is getting so much talk about Best Picture, or that it's ranking so high for people, either best of year list or best of decade list. Come on, people. Do you know a carbon copy when you see it? Joker, a fine movie, not a great movie. Number 9, American Hustle. Do you remember what it's about? Neither do I. David O. Russell, who I think is a very good director, he did some great films like, Exactly. There you go, right? No, seriously. I thought Three Kings was great. I thought he's got overrated and overpraised for Silver Linings Playbook. And then American Hustle came back, and it's got an all-star roster of Bradley Cooper, Jennifer Lawrence, what's the punchy face guy that was Hawkeye? Oh, Jeremy Renner, another punchy face kind of dude. Like, this film has a lot going for it, and yet it was completely forgettable. I think they're in love with themselves rather than really interested in making a coherent and captivating film. It got so many Oscar nominations, and rightfully so. I think it came away with zilch because people finally realized we're getting caught up in the moment of a film that is not really that good. Number 8, The Big Short. Okay, so let's take Adam McKay, who did, was it Talladega Nights, and trust in his hands to help us understand about the Wall Street housing collapse and do it in a way that is really interesting and sensitive? No. Listen, this movie was fun, but I'm really not that into this recent sort of kind of genre film where they take something really serious and complicated, and then they kind of do it in a tongue-in-cheek sort of manner. We got that recently with Vice, where it explored Dick Cheney, and then recently Bombshell, where it talked about the Megyn Kelly sexual misconduct at Fox News. And to me, that just doesn't speak to me. When you do something really sensitive and it can be really hurtful to people, I really want a more thoughtful film made about it, something like Spotlight, rather than something like The Big Short, where millions of people's lives were immensely changed and suffered because of the housing collapse. And here you have just basically a film of a bunch of douchey men either exploiting and living off this or trying to get ahead of it so that they aren't negatively impacted by it. I really didn't like this film. It hasn't aged well over time. The Big Short, a tremendously overrated film. Number 7, The Revenant. Did Leonardo DiCaprio really win an Oscar for being cold and breathing heavily? Really? I'd like to thank the Academy for this honor, really. No, you shouldn't have. This was a total vanity run amok. I could have put Birdman on this, but at least that showed a lot of complicated variables of douchey people talking about how douchey they are in the film industry or the acting world. The Revenant, to me, just I found it kind of cold, no pun intended, and I found that his acting really was not that great. At the end of the day, I don't understand why this film got so much love and acclaim and it made so much money. Is it simply because Leonardo, you fights a bear and loses? Wow, great job, Revenant. Highly overrated. Number 6, the Toy Story sequels. Number 3 and number 4 made it in one decade, and they both have like 97, 98% ratings on Rotten Tomatoes. But let's be honest. When are we going to start bagging on Toy Story for being so predictable and redundant in the same way that we're just bagging on the Star Wars franchise? I get it. Pixar makes beautiful looking films. They have this A-list roster of voice actors. But I'm finding these movies to be pretty perfunctory at this point, not particularly inspired the way that the first 2 Toy Story films were. Please stop making them, Pixar. Go back to original content like Coco, things that really can inspire people. I'm tired of like the predictable story of a toy. It's not a toy, it's a real person, but it needs a young person, but the young person grows up and goes away. Like, I get it, move on. And move on we shall. Number 5, Sing Street. Now, a lot of people may not be familiar with this movie. It was created by John Carney, who did Once, and this movie was getting all types of love. It's got a high Rotten Tomato rating, and this movie is partially interesting to me because it's got this male protagonist and this female protagonist. The female protagonist, played by Lucy Boynton, is captivating. She's sensational. I wanted a movie about her. But they kept going back to this dull, boring, uninteresting male protagonist. And quite honestly, he is a bad actor. And this movie has to make my list because it falls victim to what I think a lot of movies over the life of cinema have been guilty of, which is trying to make us interested in a dull, boring male protagonist. And he's the protagonist probably because the writer and director is a dull, boring male as well. Stop making us see films like Sing Street unless you're going to put the more interesting, complex, captivating female protagonist as the center of the story. Number 4, 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. Now, before we started our Psych Cinema series, I was doing a lot of writing for Shrink Tank, and I wrote a article called Who Else Hated 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri, because I hated this movie. I hate this movie, and judging by the number of people that read that article and left comments, a lot of people hate this movie. So why did it get so much critical acclaim? Why did it win so many Oscars? I don't get it. It's a black comedy that's not funny. It's a drama that doesn't take its subject matter seriously enough. And by the end, I didn't care about a single person in this film. It blows my mind why people love this film. I think it's basically a turd, 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. Number 3, Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman was an okay film. The trench scene is beautifully shot. It's magnificent. And Gal Gadot, she really is Wonder Woman to me. She is Wonder Woman. Sorry, Linda Carter. But otherwise, I remember that people were just up in arms that this film didn't get a Best Picture nomination, or Patty Jenkins didn't get a Best Director nomination. And people, stop. Look at this film. It's a pretty predictable film. It is a pretty run-of-the-mill superhero origin story film. And in case you didn't realize, the last third of the film is pretty damn awful, okay? It's horrible special effects. There is an antagonist or a villain that is completely uninteresting. I don't get why this film is so critically loved. It was an okay film with some great scenes, a great performance by Gal Gadot, and that's it. That's it. That's it. Number 2, the Paul Thomas Anderson trilogy of this past decade. Listen, I love Paul Thomas Anderson. I love Hard 8, Boogie Nights, Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, There Will Be Blood. I think he is a brilliant filmmaker. And yet somehow this decade of output left me very cold and uninspired, whether it be Phantom Thread, whether it be Inherent Vice, or even The Master. All 3 of these films are pretty well loved and regarded, but to me, they are junior varsity level films from Paul Thomas Anderson. Listen, and I'm also getting tired of films that just obsess over megalomaniacal men that are obsessed about themselves or something about this world. So Paul Thomas Anderson, it's time to get new material. And now we come to the number 1 most overrated film of this past decade. It's made by a filmmaker that I greatly admire. It stars actors and actresses that I think are at the top of their game, and yet this film I think is a horrible mess. I'm talking about The Wolf of Wall Street. This movie is vapid, it is vacant, it is pointless, it's self-congratulatory in its tone, and it basically is a turd. I'm sorry, Martin Scorsese. I'm sorry, Leonardo DiCaprio and all that are involved, but this movie is a mess. In fact, let me read to you some of the inspired thoughts that others have had about The Wolf of Wall Street. Variety journalist Whitney Freelander described the movie as 3 hours of cash, drugs, hookers, repeat. That about sums it up. Marshall Fine of the Huffington Post says the story wants us to be interested in characters who are dull people to start with, made duller by their delusions of being interesting because they are high. To me, this is the worst of vanity filmmaking, where you have very smart and talented people think that it's really funny, inspired to be in on the joke and try to take a satirical look at true life stories. But I'm not interested in people just sort of like drowning in their own hedonistic kind of lifestyle and decisions. I need somebody oftentimes to root for or be interested in the story. And The Wolf of Wall Street gave me none of it. So now, I know I've had to have shit on films that you love and hold in high regard. So give it to me. Give me your comments, critiques. Tell me how stupid and pointless I am as a human being for thinking that these films are overrated. And we can have a nice online battle between you and I. You're also welcome to leave me recommendations of films or television shows you'd like for me to tackle here on Psych Cinema. That's going to do it for this episode. I had a lot of fun reviewing and thinking back on this past decade of film. I think 2010 is a great decade of film. I'm looking forward to this next decade of film. Until next time, I'm Jonathan Hetterly. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again at the movies.